All right. Anyway, we've got to straighten up there, pal. We've got a show to do here, for heaven's sake. We've got important information to impart. You've read about the NWA is bringing Wrestling at the Chase back in St. Louis. Actually, at the Chase Park Plaza Hotel, the scene of the crime where it all happened, the most legendary local studio wrestling show. Well, Memphis was legendary, but Wrestling at the Chase had the aura. It was the big time, right? They're bringing that back, so I thought we would look at a little St. Louis TV history. As you'll recall, I have been going through the set of St. Louis programs that I have. Scott Teal's project started this off several weeks and weeks ago on the show, and we've been giving tidbits, and we broke up that continuity for a while because we've had other things, but I've got a few notes here that are pertinent to today, since they're bringing it back. And everybody just naturally associates St. Louis TV with Wrestling at the Chase. Brian, are you aware that Wrestling at the Chase was not the first television series that Sam Muchnick aired in St. Louis?
Yes, I was aware of that.
And were you aware of when the original programming aired?
Off the top of my head, I'm not, no.
Well, I have those answers. And by the way, here's a fun statistic. According to the Missouri State Athletic Commission, in the year 1951, and this was when they had gone to the seasonal wrestling in St. Louis, where they didn't run May, June, July, August, part of September. They came back in the fall and they ran through the spring. So as 7.5 months or whatever.
That way Sam got to hang out with Bing Devine and go to all those Cardinals games.
Well, there you go. So the season in 1951, which would have been from January 1 through the end of April, and then September through the end of the year, the gate receipts just in the city of St. Louis, not the state of Missouri, but the city of St. Louis, were $370,000. And that's with tickets priced between $3.75. And as we have used our inflation calculator before, from 1951 to today, you figure approximately a little bit over, as a matter of fact, $10 to $1. So that is in 7.5 months the equivalent of one city selling $3.7 million worth of wrestling tickets. That ain't bad.
No.
And that's apparently why, since Sam was doing so good, in 1953 at the NWA meeting, Muchnick was elected president. Do you know who the first vice president was of the NWA in 1953?
The first vice president under Sam Muchnick, not the first vice president.
No, they had, that's what I'm trying to, they had two. The first vice president, God damn it now. First vice president and second vice president. There were two vice presidents chosen every year, number one and number two.
Right, but you're saying in 53. Yes, you're not saying in 1940.
No, it wasn't the original vice president, just that was the position. The position's name is first vice president.
1953?
Yes.
I don't know off the top of my head, so I'm going to guess based on, I'm thinking who's doing what where and who it wouldn't be for sure. Vice president of the NWA. They never respected Nick Goulas to that level.
Second guy underneath Sam Muchnick.
Nick Goulas?
No, the second guy underneath Sam Muchnick, the first vice president. Who was it?
Al Heft.
You are incorrect, sir. Fred Kohler.
See, I didn't want to say Kohler because I was thinking by 53 he wasn't as high as he had been a few years earlier. That's why I didn't pick Kohler.
Well, and that surprised me also because that's at that time he was still using Vern Gagne as U.S. champion.
Yeah.
Which is what led to the heat with the NWA and everything to begin with. The second vice president, I won't even make you guess, Leroy McGurk. And the treasurer was Sam Avey, the promoter in Tulsa, who McGurk pretty much took over from, and then Watts took over from there. Lou Thez was the world heavyweight champion. Baron Leone was the world junior heavyweight champion. And as recognized by the NWA, the world light heavyweight champion, he was politically connected. He was also a city councilman in Tacoma, Washington, but the NWA never promoted light heavyweights except in this guy's area, Frank Stojak, a name from the past.
When did the junior heavyweight title lose all of its luster, do you think? Because obviously...
After Hodge.
I was going to say in the 50s and the 60s, it was a major title. And then all of a sudden, no disrespect to Denny Brown or Nelson Royal at that stage, but it was a step down from what it had been.
Yeah, well, even the late 70s, I mean, after Hodge, Ken Mantell, seriously, you know, God damn it, whom am I thinking? Ron Starr had it for a while. He was a heck of a worker.
Very good worker, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. I should check. Rock Rims wrote a biography of, or I guess it was Ron Starr wrote it with Rock, so it's autobiography technically.
Ron and Rock wrote it.
Ron and Rock.
If you've read the Ritz, if you've read the Ritz they've written, you'll know they're really well written Ritz. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked. And by the way, in 1953, at the NWA meeting, the board voted that the world heavyweight champion would not appear on any cards that girl wrestlers were booked on.
That was probably a Thez.
That was
edict.
a Thez rule.
Yeah.
Thez did not want to appear on cards with women, midgets, or the wrestling bear because he felt that it made the world championship and the business in general look less than legitimate, which he had ample points probably for that, but
or he was scared of Gorgeous Gus.
Well, no, because actually, I think, and also he'd had bad experiences in the past because John Cosper uncovered one of the times he appeared in Louisville in the 40s. He was on the card with the guy that wrestled the alligator, so he had, you know, no zoo animals, no midgets, no girls for Thez. Anyway, the TV program. In May 1953, St. Louis got weekly live wrestling on Saturday nights from the St. Louis House, not from the Chase Park Plaza, but the St. Louis House. It was an hour-and-a-half program, 9:30 to 11 o'clock on Saturday nights on KSD television in St. Louis. And the reason why that they got that is because the Stag Beer Company, or the Stag Beer, the brewery that made Stag Beer, became the official sponsor and set up the Stag Beer Wrestling Network. And not only was this show on KSD in St. Louis, but also on WHBQ in Memphis, Channel 13, that would later put the Memphis Studio Wrestling show on. In Memphis, there had been some telecasts on WMC in, like, I think 1951, maybe early 52, from the Ellis Auditorium on Monday nights, where they showed an hour block of probably like two of the matches on the card or whatever. And then that went away, and there was no local wrestling in Memphis on television until Roy Welch and Nick Goulas took over the town, and you know, they got on WHBQ, which was, 1959, right, as Sputnik Monroe was 58, late 58, as Sputnik was coming in. But they could see the matches from St. Louis in Memphis because this beer company apparently was a hell of a sponsorship, and they were not only on in WHBQ, but also WCIA in Champaign, Illinois, and the TV station down in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. So in that kind of rectangular area, the viewership between those markets was listed at of over 1 million people. And of course, back in those days, there was a high viewer count per home because if you had a television, you only had one. So everybody in the house was watching the same television if they were watching TV at all. So you got, but that's Memphis, St. Louis, Champaign, Illinois, and Cape Girardeau accounted for 1 million people in the United States watching pro wrestling on Saturday night at 9:30. They ran 2 years on television on Saturday nights, live on TV. And then when the TV contract was up, they were so popular, the St. Louis house shows were smaller shows with not as many big stars, not the main event matches, but they continued on the off weekends that they didn't run a big show at the Kiel Auditorium or at the arena, the Checkerdome later, as it was called. They would have shows at the St. Louis house on the off weekends on Saturday nights. So they were still running weekly live wrestling of some description in St. Louis. But that show ran from May 1953 to May 1955. And the reason why it was canceled because the brewery was sold and the new owner ixnayed the sponsorship. And the fans organized letter writing campaigns. They talked about it in the programs. And basically, Sam told them, hey, we're not going to put a television show on the air until we get a sponsor to cover the costs and et cetera. And that was why all the fans kept writing letters and blah, blah, blah in St. Louis. And finally, it was, about 4 years later, Muchnick ends up on an airplane with Harold Koppler, who was the head of the new station in town, KPLR. And they made a deal on the back of an airplane napkin for them to produce the program from the Chase Park Plaza. And that program ran, it ran from 1959 until the St. Louis Wrestling Club pretty much dissolved, didn't it? Not from the ballroom.
Vince McMahon took it over. Vince McMahon took over wrestling at the Chase until, that's right. I guess mid-'84? When did it actually fold? And it was just WWF at that point without wrestling at the Chase.
Yeah, mid to late because they were customizing.
Yeah.
Larry Matuszak had got involved at first and said, this is not going to go anywhere. And there was some turmoil at the end and it hurt St. Louis badly. But even though wrestling at the Chase hadn't been at the actual Chase for a while, they still called it. The program was so ingrained as a cultural institution with that title that they kept the Chase name, but it ran 25 years. And
what was worse for St. Louis, Vince McMahon in 84 and 85 or Bob Geigel after he pushed out Larry Matuszak?
Vince could not have gone in there and taken over had Geigel and everybody else involved besides Larry Matuszak not run it into the ground in just 2 years, a year and a half after Sam was gone.
Think of how many people who helped Vince almost got shoved into his lap. Not in any sexual way, but just in terms of the people he needed. Jim Barnett got pushed out. Vince McMahon was ready to take him in. Larry Matuszak pushed out, struggling. Vince McMahon's ready to work with him. Mike LaBelle was his own animal, and he ended up suing Vince, of course. But so many of the guys that Vince needed for his national push, and especially like St. Louis targeted towards specific markets, these people were just sent to him. They were pushed out of the mainstream NWA, and Vince was ready to collect them and do what he did.
Sam Muchnick retired on January 1st, 1982 with a sold-out show at the Checkerdome. There was 18,000 people. It was front page coverage in the newspapers and the TV stations. Sam was an institution. Everybody was there to pay tribute. Within not even a year, Geigel and honestly, Pat O'Connor too, and Bulldog Bob Brown was involved because they
Harley. And
Harley unfortunately was involved, but they integrated St. Louis into the Kansas City territory, and because they all were owners in Kansas City, and Kansas City and St. Louis were worlds away when Sam was running it in terms of the business and the level of talent and et cetera. The main event Kansas City guys were the third match in St. Louis. So within a year, the screwy finishes and just Zabadon, subpar talent, they'd run Larry Matuszak off, and he was going to start his own. He did start his own promotion, just like Sam had 40 years beforehand.
And Blackjack Mulligan no-showed him when he was in the main event against Brody. Mulligan no-showed.
But Larry was close with Brody, and Brody went over, and Larry actually had a couple of successful shows, but he got caught up in the middle of Vince trying to come in there also. And we could do a whole show on that, but point I was going to make is within 2 years, but the Midnight Express and I made our debut at the Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis in, I think it was May of 1985. And this historic place where every great wrestling attraction in the world had wrestled, and the the attendance for 40 years was among the biggest in North America of any city and blah, 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 right? 3 years after Sam Muchnick's gone, we went in there. The house was like 11 grand. There was maybe 1,400 people in this place. And we worked with the local tag team champions, Bulldog Bob Brown and Marty Jannetty. And I'm like, and I think the Batten twins were there also. We did a couple of shots over there, but and I'm not knocking the Batten twins, but after they had seen, my God, the Valentines and Von Erichs and Longsons and Flairs and Brodies and Races and Rogerses and anyway, one more note. Would you like some other market television ratings from the 1950s?
Yeah,
because we always talk about, well, this show did this rating, but we never compare, because we don't actually have a lot of this documentation. We don't compare the wrestling rating to ratings of other television programs against them, you know, to say, okay, well, who was watching what, right? And I came across this in another one of the programs. This is from 1959. In Cleveland, Ohio, the local wrestling program in Cleveland, Ohio, for the week that this article was printed, did an 11.4 rating. That's local television, 11.4 rating in Cleveland, Ohio. It was on against an NCAA basketball tournament game that did a 9.9. So wrestling was 1.5 points bigger than the NCAA basketball game. And obviously all of these stations were network affiliates because they didn't even have independent stations in Cleveland in 1959. In Fort Wayne, Indiana, do you remember Bob Cummings, Brian? The Bob Cummings show, Bob Cummings, the comedian?
I know who he is, but I don't remember the show because I was not.
Love that Bob. Love that Bob. Bob Cummings had a number of them, actually, situation comedy, but I believe it was the Bob Cummings show in 1959, but it was network television. It might have been CBS, it might have been NBC, I can't remember. Nevertheless, it's network TV and a situation comedy back when there were 3 networks, right? So Bob Cummings did a 19.0 rating in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Opposite, the local wrestling show did a 23.0.
Wow.
And in Omaha, Nebraska, you remember Jack Parr when he was host of the Tonight Show.
I'm a big fan of Jack Parr, actually. Yes.
Okay. Jack Parr, ladies and gentlemen, you younger folks, was the host of the Tonight Show before Johnny Carson. And in 1959, the Tonight Show with Jack Parr in Omaha, Nebraska, did a 10.3. The wrestling show opposite did a 15.2. So this is the equivalent of a local wrestling show doing a third again as much as the Tonight Show rating in a local market, or another wrestling show doing a 25% more than a situation comedy on network television.
Although, to be fair, Johnny Carson may have connected with Nebraska a little better than Jack Parr did.
Well, obviously, but still, nevertheless, just a little comparison there.
And Jack Parr is great. Anyone who doesn't know him, go on YouTube and look for Jack Parr hosting the Tonight Show clips, or the Jack Parr Show. He had a separate show. Great interviews, very smart, very funny. Good.
Very urbane, witty.
Yeah.
But do you like those statistics, Brian?
I do, very much.
You like those because you're a statistics kind of guy. You know, we got a lot of statistic people out in the cult of Cornette, and a lot of them, according to the feedback that we've gotten, like to play these daily fantasy sports. But did you know, Brian Last, that 85% of the people who play daily fantasy sports lose? 85% of them lose, 10% of them win, and 5% have to change their identities. But the reason why is simple. The game is rigged against you. You're playing against thousands of other lineups, not to mention experts who've got more tools and more time, and you don't stand a chance. You don't stand a snowball's chance in hell, people. You better fold your tent right now unless you introduce yourselves to Stat Hero, the first ever daily fantasy sports book that puts the player in control and winning within reach. You can feel it, Brian. You can reach those ropes and get that rope break. Stat Hero shows you their lineups and dares you to beat them. It's you versus the house in a head-to-head fantasy matchup. And all my fantasies involve head. Your name, your stakes, winner take all. You've got the advantage. Stat Hero is showing you their lineups ahead of time, and nobody else does that. You're laughing?
Nobody else does that.
Nobody else does that.
Nobody else does that.
Nobody. You're in total control. I love to be in control in my fantasies. And right now, Stat Hero is daily fantasy sports the way it was meant to be, one-on-one. No group action here. Folks, go to stathero.com/JCE and sign up right now for free. Right now, you can get 3 times back on your first play. That's right. It's a 300% match, which apparently is unheard of. I've never heard of it. Go to stathero.com/JCE. That's stathero.com/JCE. 3 times back on your first play. 300% match. This stuff is unheard of. It's even unfantasized about.
That's right. Your one-stop shop for all your fantasy sports needs. Fantasy sports like maybe unicorn polo, Bigfoot basketball. What other fantasy sports are there to play, Jim?
I certainly do. Fornication fishing. That's what I'm into. I like the outdoors. But right now...
Fornication fishing.
Yes, you never know what you'll land.
A fish frenzy.
It's a literal fish copia of thing. Anyway,